Well, hello and welcome to the Deeper Walk Building Balance online conference. My name is Nick Harang. I'm the Director of Operations here at Deeper Walk, and we are so glad that you're joining us today. For those of you that are joining us live for this online conference, and those of you watching at a later time, we're really glad that we could record it so that you can catch it when you can. Today we're going to talk about some things that we find to be extremely helpful at any given time of life, but especially right now that we find ourselves in this global challenge of the corona pandemic, extremely relevant and valuable and very applicable. And I know that some of you are coming here today because you know you need some more balance for you. You've seen perhaps the image of the ball that's been a little bit deflated on some of our marketing, and you're like, yeah, I need to put some more air in the ball. I need some more bounce to help me navigate the hard things of life. Well, you're going to get a lot of practical tools and great insights from scripture and brain science and just years of practice from Stefanie Hinman, who I'll introduce in a moment, and Dr. Warner, and it's going to help you a lot. And I know some of you also are here because you not only want to grow your resilience, you want to help the people around you, your friends, your family, church members, community. And so we are excited to equip you to help equip others with the very skills that are going to cause them to not just go through things and just survive, but really to thrive and to grow closer to God and grow healthier relationships, no matter the circumstances that we find ourselves in. Very glad today to have our presenters, Dr. Marcus Warner and Stefanie Hinman, with us. Hello, Stefanie. Hello, Marcus. Welcome.
Hello.
Hey there, Nick.
So glad to have you guys. And you guys have been working on this content for a long time and have a book in the works that we'll be talking about in a moment. So today's kind of a big day. It's kind of the first official rollout of the full enchilada of what all this content has been developing for some time. So in one sense, I think congratulations are in order. So thank you guys for all your work to bring this together.
Yeah, it is a bit of a relief. At the same time, it's very exciting. So,
yeah. Well, thanks, Stefanie. And Marcus is joining us from Indiana in his home, and Stefanie's in Kansas, and I'm in Northern California. So, wherever you are, we're glad you're joining us today. And for those of you that are new to Deeper Walk, let me introduce Dr. Marcus Warner to you. Marcus is the president of Deeper Walk International. He's been so for the last 14 years. And he's a prolific author. He's written over a dozen books on a number of topics, including leadership, spiritual warfare, walking deeper with God, and understanding the Bible, and many more. But his passion is to take complex things that can change lives and just make it simple and accessible for people to understand and apply. And I know you're going to experience that today. And Stefanie Hinman is a board-certified Christian counselor and a registered art therapist. She's also the founder of Healing Expressions, where she works with individuals, families, and schools, as well as organizations in the areas of trauma healing and recovery, crisis intervention, and building resilient kids, families, and communities. So we are excited to hear from both of these people that have spent a long time developing the ideas that you're going to hear today, and they've seen them work in their own lives, in their families, and in the people that they've ministered to through the years. So thank you so much again for being here, Dr. Warner and Stefanie. And with that, Dr. Warner, would you take us into session one?
all right. Thank you, Nick. It's a pleasure to be able to dive into this. Let me give you a little background. Back in the early 2000s, I still find it remarkable that I teach on emotional stuff because, you know, when I first got into ministry, I was one of those guys who are like, emotions don't matter. You just got to kind of, you know, study the Bible and, you know, be a good person and everything else takes care of itself. And I didn't think I had any issues. None of this stuff made any sense to me. I was not the kind of person who was all about, you know, touchy-feely, if you will. And so it's kind of interesting that now here we are trying to help with emotional resilience. And part of the reason for this is that I began to realize that I didn't have as much as I thought I did, that I was actually just really good at avoiding stuff that caused me to get triggered and avoiding things that caused me to be overwhelmed with my emotions. But the more that you grow and the more that you engage with life, the more you have to be a leader, the more that you have to be with a family, the more that you find yourself interacting with politics, the more you find yourself interacting with all kinds of things in this world, you realize, wow, you know, I have all these emotions that come up. What do I do with these emotions? How do I learn to regulate these emotions? How do I act like myself in the midst of them? And so I said, somebody asked me once why I've written so many books. And I said, I write books on things I needed And so as I study them, because I really want to grow in this area, I want to understand it. As I learn, I want to share with other people what I've learned. So along the way, a few years ago, Stefanie Hinman got a hold of us at Deeper Walk, and she had created a curriculum for children to help them with emotional resilience. So Stefanie, you want to give us a little bit of the background about, that curriculum, how you got started in your interest with emotional resilience, and then we'll dive in from there.
Sure. So right out of school, I got a job at a home for children who have severe behavior disorders. It's a residential home in the foster care system. And I, throughout my graduate years, worked there along as side by side with a hospice, a local hospice. And so in those early years, I worked with children who'd seen more adversity in their short little lives than most people see in their entire lifetime. And this question began to emerge in me, which is, why do some children and their families seem to grow stronger in times of trial and adversity, and some collapse and crumble? And so around that same time, I began having children of my own. I had 4 children in 5 years, and so that pushed me to the edge of my emotional capacity. And so this question became even more important to me. Knowing all the adversity that my children would face, I found myself confronting with the Lord, how do I protect my children? How do I help them navigate this world that they are going to be living in that seems to be increasing in adversity? And so through those years of working with families, doing the research, we did a long-term study with a local hospital here, and did a lot of pre-testing, post-testing, and worked out this database of, we had a lot of research on what made adults more resilient, but we didn't really have any on what makes children more resilient. So we took the adult research and we translated it into a way that we could teach it easily to children. And what we found was that it worked. The children we worked with became more resilient. But then yet again, there was this next roadblock where I began to realize that I could work with a child, I could teach them about emotional capacity, I could teach them to express their feelings, but if they went home and it wasn't safe in their home, then that could actually create more trauma, and they could get punished for expressing their emotions or something along those lines. And so I began to realize that we have to really get this information into the hands of families and communities, schools, because when we have healthy, resilient families, we have healthy, resilient children.
No, so when she sent her material to me, I took a look at this and I was like, hey, this syncs so well with what we're trying to teach, what we're trying to learn, and the things that I've learned from Dr. Wilder, from Chris Corsi, from the folks at Life Model Works and Thrive, and then having Stefanie bring a kind of a fresh perspective into some of this to add some things to what I'd been learning. And it was a really good blend. So that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to start with session 1. And session 1, get my computer working, are 2 essentials of emotional capacity. So this starts with the brain science of the whole thing, and that is, what is it that we need? So defining emotional capacity, first of all, it is the ability to handle weight. And I got this definition from Dr. Wilder, and it's basically the idea that you can tell who the most mature person is in any room by who can handle the most weight without falling apart, right? Without blowing up, melting down, whatever, shutting down. Who can handle the most weight? And to put it in rare leadership terms, remain relational, act like themselves, and return to joy. So as you see, we got a picture here of a walking bridge, and it can carry a certain amount of weight, right? You'd feel good maybe walking across that bridge, but you probably wouldn't want to drive your car across it. On the other hand, we've got, the Golden Gate Bridge here, and you think about the difference in capacity, right? How much weight can it hold? And you say, well, this has a whole lot more capacity than the other one. In the same way, emotional capacity is built on this idea of how much does it take before I get triggered. And when I get triggered, I either shut down, I blow up, or things fall apart in my life. So like Stefanie, you were talking about, I think it was Dr. Siegel and flipping the lid as an example of what we were talking about. It's just like another way of looking at emotional capacity. You want to explain that to them?
Sure. So if we look at emotional capacity, like our emotional immune system, the stronger it is, the better we're able to rebound from adversity. We have sort of a capacity wall. It's sort of the end of our capacity, and it's always growing. We can continue to grow it, but at any given time, when we assess that we don't have the internal or the external resources to handle whatever might be in front of me that feels really overwhelming, we call that being triggered. Triggers are different for everybody. They kind of come over time through our experience. But when we get triggered, our brain sends messages, the autonomic nervous system sends messages that there's danger and it's time to kick in a whole new backup system. When that backup system takes over, we go into fight, flight, or freeze. So Dan Siegel, when we teach this to kids, we talk about it like flipping the lid. So if everything is calm and I feel safe and I feel connected, my prefrontal cortex is online, I'm thinking like myself, I'm acting like myself, I'm able to learn, I'm able to be creative. But when my system goes then into fight, flight, or freeze, I flip my lid, I lose access to this. And I'm now just acting out of my emotional brain. And the emotional brain is only concerned with, is this safe or is this not safe? And so I lose access to all this beautiful thinking up here.
Yeah, it's really much a survival instinct, isn't it? Because you go from being who I am to just wanting to survive what you're going through. And that survival instinct loses the ability to remain relational, to act like yourself, to be creative, to solve problems well. And you can very quickly find yourself treating other people like enemies instead of treating them like other human beings to relate to. So I thought that was a good analysis. So let's take a look at this. When we say there are two essentials of emotional capacity in the brain, what we're talking about, first of all, is that there is a joy center. Now, Stefanie just mentioned the right orbital prefrontal cortex, okay? So you think about it, orbital means eye. So right orbital means right behind the right eye. And prefrontal, well, you can hear frontal there. So this is the front part of your brain. And the cortex means that it's at the top part of your brain. So it's at the top, it's at the front, it's right behind your right eye. This part of your brain, we have a lot of different terms for this part of the brain. Dr. Wilder calls it the captain in some of his writings. We call it the joy center. We called it the identity center. In rare leadership, we call it the action center. And the reason is that this part of the brain really is the part of my brain that thinks of itself as me. And so because of that, it's like if I have an accident to this part of my brain, I can literally forget who I am. I can forget how it's like me to act. I can forget how it's like me to interact with the world. In the same way, when I flip my lid, right, if I go like this and I get triggered and I lose access, the brain activity to this joy center in my brain can get shut off. And what happens is I can't find my way to live out of joy, and I can't find my way to act like myself, since the identity center and the joy center are the same part of the brain. And so when we get triggered, one of the problems here is that if I don't have the emotional capacity to continue on being myself, even though I'm feeling a certain emotion, that emotion will take over. It'll literally shut down a part of my brain and keep it from functioning. So I won't be able to find joy. I won't feel like myself. And that's really important. So one of the essentials that has to happen to build a capacity is that this part of your brain needs to get really well developed. Now, we're going to be as practical as possible as we go through here. So we talk about how do we build emotional capacity. We're going to talk about ABC, right? ABC, appreciation, beliefs, and connections. And so the idea here is the fastest way to grow a large joy center and a really well developed joy center is through the practice of appreciation. So we're going to have a whole session here just on ways of practicing appreciation, what we mean by this, how do you learn to quiet, and so if you have a well-developed joy center, your capacity to quiet your other emotions will increase, and your ability to live with joy will increase. So the joy center is the first major thing. When we say there's 2 essentials of emotional capacity, you need a really big joy center is number 1. And number 2 is you need joy pathways. And what we mean by this is that there's a front part of the brain and the back part of the brain. When we're living in joy, we're in the front part of our brain. When we lose joy and we go into negative emotions, our brain activity goes to the back. And there are, and you can think of our various negative emotions as different points on the back of our head. And we need a separate bridge or a separate pathway back to joy from each one of those negative emotions. So because of that, I might be good at returning to joy from sadness, but not good at all at returning to joy from anger. Or I could be pretty good at returning to joy from shame, but I can't return to joy from despair or something like that. So learning how to return to joy and building these joy pathways is the second key ingredient to emotional capacity. So I know, Stephanie, you got a book called Bridges, right? You've written some things on bridges. You want to tell them a little bit about your understanding of how we build bridges, in this from upsetting emotions back to joy?
Yes, so Building Bridges was the name of the first it was a trauma-informed resiliency curriculum, resiliency building curriculum. And so we talked about, when I talk about the Joy Center, I talk about feeling safe, calm, and connected, and that refers to our attachment, feeling secure attachment, and feeling safe in the moment, feeling like my body is calm, all feels well in the world. I feel like I'm acting like myself. People are happy to be with me. And then we talk a lot about the big 6 overwhelming emotions. Well, first we talk a lot about emotions and how we all have emotions. They're, it's a part of the human experience. They're like the weather, they color our day. And then we talk about the big 6. And so the big 6 are the ones that we've been talking about here today, and building pathways back from each one of them back to the feeling safe, calm, and connected. Those are the neuro pathways, but we call them bridges. So we might, and we'll do some of this today, we might think of a time I felt safe, I felt calm, I felt connected. And then we might go around and talk about what does it feel like to feel overwhelmed, noticing in our body how our body changes and how we feel different when we start to feel overwhelmed, or maybe a time I felt overwhelmed. And then we'll build a bridge from overwhelmed back to calm. And so each child over the course of the program will have had an opportunity to try out a lot of different variety kinds of coping strategies. We kind of engaged a lot of different medium like art and movement and music and play, so that children have a chance to decide what they like best, what works best for them. For adults, it might be a bath works really good for one person and another person hates baths. So you just kind of have to experiment and decide what works for you in returning back to calm, safe, and connected.
That's great. So you can think of these joy pathways as bridges right back to the joy center, or you can think of them as just pathways that form as neurons fire, they wire is kind of the expression. So as neurons fire together, they wire together. And then over time, they get wrapped with white matter, which if we can get to the point where I not only have a pathway back to joy, but I have traveled that pathway so often, it happens. So it begins to happen almost automatically so that I'm not even thinking about it. And that's the ultimate goal. I mean, when you get to that point, your emotional capacity has been developed pretty significantly. We probably need to put a caveat in here too, and that is that there is no such thing as infinite capacity except for God, right? So only Jesus, and his Father, the Holy Spirit, only God has infinite capacity. So all of us at some point or another run out, right? And when we run out, we need replenishment. We need people to help us. We need something more. But the goal here is to grow the capacity we do have so that we don't get overwhelmed as easily and that we can recover more quickly. We can bounce back more quickly when we do face difficult emotions. So what we want to do now is kind of walk you through the brain science underneath this. So what I've developed here is kind of a quadrant. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a quadrant with a vertical line, a horizontal line. And you can think of this in brain terms as the cortical line. That is, things are subcortical, or they are above the or they are cortical, or they are subcortical in brain terms. To make this as simple as we can, the cortical you can think of as the conscious part of your brain. Now on the right side of your brain, when I'm conscious, I'm simply aware. I'm not necessarily putting words to things, but there's an awareness. There's what you might even call mindfulness. I am mindful of what's going on in my world around me. There's a conscious awareness of life. On the left side of my brain is where I begin putting words to my conscious awareness. So you can think of the left side as where conscious thought takes place, whereas this is conscious awareness. So, you can kind of divide them that way. And then we have the subconscious. And what that means is subconscious means these things are happening before it gets to the point of being conscious. There is a whole lot of activity taking in our brains before it gets there. Also, what we're going to find is that there is a circuitry to the way the brain works, and that it starts on the bottom right, it comes up to the top, jumps to the left, and goes out. So you can almost think about it like electrical wiring. And it comes up from your nervous system, up through the spinal cord into the right side of your brain first, and then it goes up to the top of the right of your brain, jumps across to the left, and then it comes down. And so part of what that means is that what happens on the left side of the brain is going to have a lot of effect on what's coming out. And that's why our ABC, appreciation, is really about how do we build this joy center. B is beliefs, and that has to do with what we think about life, because our beliefs have an awful lot to do with what ends up coming out of us. And so we want to address that as well. So so you can think about appreciation is growing the joy center. Beliefs is what's happening on the top left side of the brain. Connections is what's happening on the right side of the brain. In fact, the entire right side of the brain can be thought of just as a big connection engine. It's just an engine that's driven to form attachment. And what it wants more than anything is joy. In fact, I was rereading something from Dr. Wilder a couple weeks ago where he said that nobody ever goes to therapy for too much joy, right? You don't sit around going, man, I really need to go get some counseling. I've just been at way too much joy lately. It's like and joy is literally the only emotion that a baby will pursue, right? They will go out of their way to pursue joy. And so joy is the emotion, if you will, that our brains are designed to run on. And God wired us this way that we are constantly seeking joyful connections with other people. And so you think about it as if God wants us to have joyful connections with him. And so every day the priest would say to the people of Israel, may you know God's shalom, and may you have the joy of his face shine upon you, right? And it's this idea that peace and joy come from our connection to God, and then our connection to his people, and then our connection to one another. And God wants us to have these joyful connections. And so connections play a really big role in building our emotional capacity. We come over here to beliefs, and then our beliefs are either going to attack those connections, or they're going to help make them more available. And that is, some beliefs, say, don't connect, don't connect, don't connect, scary, scary, scary. And that other beliefs are helping us be more loving people. They're helping us to live more like ourselves. And so we'll talk more about this, but you can think beliefs is kind of the left side of the brain. The engine over there is really a beliefs-driven engine, and the right side of the brain is a connections-driven engine. So you can think about the two sides of the brain sort of this way. So again, you can see where we get ABC from. Appreciation, beliefs, connections. Comes right out of the way that the brain functions. So let's take a look at the bottom quadrant of this brain. And so this again is on the connection side of the brain. The bottom right is the attachment, the assessment center. And these two things, basically what happens is your brain lights up whenever anything is personal. So that's your attachment center lighting up. Now, you notice the word nucleus accumbens there. The nucleus accumbens is the part of your brain that craves things. So when your nucleus accumbens is craving joyful attachment, but joyful attachment is not available, it will start craving something else. And that's why sometimes if there's nobody around, you eat a lot of chocolate or you eat a lot of ice cream, right? Because I can't find the joyful attachment that I'm really craving, so I start craving this. And this can, escalate to points where I'm now craving alcohol, I'm craving cocaine, I'm craving heroin. Almost all addictions are related to this attachment level of the brain, where I am forming cravings for and attachments to non-relational substitutes of the actual joyful relationships that I'm craving. So the attachment center is very important. And I think it's interesting that God designed us, that's the first part of our brain that is interacting with the information that's coming in. And then as soon as our brain lights up that something is personal to me, it goes immediately to the assessment center, which can give one of three assessments. And that is, this is a good attachment, this is a bad attachment, or this is a scary attachment. And this happens before you have a chance to think about it. Notice it's not your belief center that's making this assessment. This is happening automatically before you have time to even think about it. And this is where triggering happens if it's going to happen. So in other words, if I get an assessment of good, there's no problem. The brain just keeps on functioning. I have nothing to overcome, nothing to bounce back from. But if I get a bad or scary, that's going to trigger that FFF response. So Stefanie, you want to just walk them through the FFF response a little bit and, what that, kind of your understanding of how that operates?
Sure. So fight, flight, or freeze is so the nervous system works like a car engine. We have a gas pedal, we have a brake. When we need to get up and go and do life, we push on the gas and we have the energy to get up and take care of our families and go to work and do the things we need to do. And then at the end of the day, we need to be able to have our break so that we can rest, digest, enjoy the day, enjoy connection. And so the idea is that we learn how to navigate life by engaging these two systems. We don't want to slam on the brakes or slam on the gas. We want to do it nice and gently. That's how we're supposed to run. We do have some built-in backup systems, and so if we assess danger, we go into the fight or flight. Our bodies get just dumped with the stress hormones that we can either fight the bear or do what we need to do. And then the idea is that when the crisis is over, our bodies slip back into that rest and digest. So what happens is with trauma or with toxic stress is that we can get stuck. Either our gas pedal is stuck and we're revving, or our brake is stuck and we just can't get out of bed.
Yep. And, I don't know about you, I've experienced both of those. I've had times in my life where the pedal was stuck to the floor and I could not quiet my body. Like I would feel my hand shaking constantly. I would feel, burning in the back of my neck and my face, right? Your heart is racing and what's happening is like the amygdala, which is the second level of the brain, is something has convinced it that it needs to be constantly sending a warning to you. And so you're staying in a heightened case of this kind of overwhelm. So that can happen with the flight response is, I think of claustrophobia, like I just got to get out of here. I can't be here anymore. It's that feeling that I just need to run. And then the fight response is a result of saying that something is bad. So flight tends to come from this is scary. Fight tends to come from this is bad. And it makes me just want to make this stop, right? This has to stop right now. I am done with this. And so anger is a motivation to make something stop that I don't like. And so what happens is a lot of us, if we've never learned how to bounce back from difficult emotions, we can get stuck right here. And if we get stuck right here, notice what happens is we lose access to the top right-hand quadrant of our brain. And as we're going to see right now, the top right-hand quadrant of our brain is extremely important to us being able to be ourselves, regulate our emotions, and continue to keep our identity the way it's supposed to be. So we go up to the Attunement Center and then the Action Center. The Action Center you can think of as the Joy Center in the brain that we had talked about before. And attunement is essentially my ability to be aware of the world around me and read it correctly. So one of the primary tasks of the cingulate cortex, which is the attunement part of my brain, is to read body language. So for example, even now through video, you can kind of read body language, and you can see if one of us looks bored, or if one of us is really passionate about something, and you can kind of read and go, oh yeah, that, they look like that's what's happening. So there's also been studies that come out that America's been spending so much time on Zoom and internet video that there is a fatigue setting in, because the speed at which the brain processes this information is way faster than the speed at which the video can send you the signal. And so your brain gets exhausted trying to, constantly stay engaged with this person on the other end of a video line, because we are designed to attune way faster than that. And so it can actually wear you out a little bit if you're going from one Zoom meeting to another all day long. So that's part of the dynamic there of what happens. The Attunement Center is also designed partly so that I can be doing a task but remain aware of the world around me in case something dangerous does show up, or in case something good shows up that I should be aware of. Like if I'm doing my work and I should notice if one of my children has a need and I need to go take care of them. So so my left brain can be focused on my task and doing this, while my Attunement Center is staying aware, consciously aware of the world around me. And so when my child comes in, I may become consciously aware of the fact that they're there, but then at some point I need to now shift and give them my attention. But it's the Attunement Center is the first thing that picks up on what's going on around me, that reads the body language, reads the signals of the things that are going on. The next part then is the Action Center, and this is the most important part of the brain, because this is the part of the brain that has the ability to regulate how I respond to my fight, flight, or freeze reactions. So if I can keep access to this part of my brain, I can kind of walk myself through regulating my emotions, right? It's not that so being in my joy center doesn't mean I don't feel fear, right? Being in my joy center doesn't mean I don't feel anger. It doesn't mean I don't feel shame or the other emotions we may talk about. What it means is that I still feel like myself while I'm dealing with this emotion, and I can kind of walk myself through regulating that emotion. So I'll have Stefanie comment on this in just a minute, but let me give you one example. In infants around 18 months of age, up until 18 months of age, the baby's brain functions as if they are a completely different person with every emotion they feel. So you might say we're all born multiple personalities, I guess. I don't know. It's kind of like we all have a different personality for every emotion we feel. And around 18 months of age, which is also about the beginning of what we call the terrible twos, that's the time when our brain is learning how to stay a single person regardless of how I feel. And that is, how do I still be me when I'm mad? How do I still be me when I feel shame? How do I still be me when I feel fear? And how do I form an integrated self regardless of what emotion that I'm feeling? So during those terrible twos, from about 18 months to 4 years of age, if I go through that in a healthy way, I will have experienced all kinds of negative emotions, but will have successfully navigated those emotions with the help of people in my life, such that I'm not overwhelmed by them and my brain doesn't see them as a reason to turn into somebody else. However, if I get through that 18 months to 4 year window and there's some of those emotions I don't get that development with, then I can still be 60 years old. And when that emotion comes up, I turn into a different person. I don't act like myself because I have never learned that skill. I've never developed that capacity. So when we talk about, that's why we say the joy center, the identity center, the action center, it's all the same center of the brain. It's this right orbital prefrontal cortex. And as this all together kind of describes what is happening on this connection side of the brain that is designed by God to want to crave healthy connections, to form healthy connections, and to stay relational regardless of the emotions that I'm feeling. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong here. And when we need to bounce back from things, oftentimes it's not just our beliefs. It is something going on in this side of the brain that needs our attention, and that's why we're giving it the focus that we are right now. So, Stefanie, anything further you want to add on this?
I would just, I guess, add that this, as you were saying, ideally develops in the early childhood when there's attunement between the parent and the child, and the parent is able to offer a healthy, regulated nervous system to the child, and the child learns this process by co-regulating with mom or dad or caregiver. And so as the child grows, they grow in their ability to then learn to self-regulate, to get to that action center. And so if we don't learn those skills in childhood, what we know is that we can learn them at any time. And so that's really good news. So we can continue to build those pathways in our brain and learn how to get better and better at self-regulating.
Yep. Now, you notice that there's also an on-off switch here. And the on-off switch that we mentioned, notice, can either happen at level 2 or level 3. If it happens at level 2, we don't remember that the event ever happened. So you think about amnesic trauma, where something so bad happened that I don't remember it. That means that by the level 2 part of my brain is what shut everything down. If I shut down at level 3, if that's the switch that flips things off, I will remember the pain. I will remember the upsetting memory, but it won't forward what needs to be forwarded to the top part of my brain in order for me to act like myself and return to joy. So that's kind of, you can think about it this way, that on this part of my brain is where all the relational circuitry in my brain is located. So if I'm going to be my relational self, I'm going to stay relationally engaged with people. It's very important that I learn to regulate this on-off switch. And that is, how do I get my relational switch on so that I get access to the relational part of my brain? And I'll be honest, there are certain things I still struggle with on this. Like there are things like in my marriage that Brenda and I can talk about, and it's no problem talking about the problems and the emotions and keeping the relationships switch on. There are still some things that when it gets triggered, man, it's hard to keep the relational circuits on, because that's a less developed part of the brain. So what that does, when I'm recognizing that I get triggered by something, it can turn into good news, because what that means is when I recognize that, hey, this is triggering me, it tells me this is where I need to be focusing some work, right? I need to be focusing some attention here, that I apparently have trouble getting back to joy from this emotion. So we're going to focus some attention on that, which means I'm going to start talking to Jesus about that emotion. I'm going to start working on skills related to that emotion. I'm going to look at what my beliefs are about that emotion, but so you can take these triggers that happen in your life and you can turn them into opportunities for growth by saying, okay, the very fact that I got triggered by this means I have some growth I need to do. Let's start diving into that. Mm-hmm. All right, let's go to the next part of the brain over here. So you notice we said before that the brain activity comes from the spine up into the right side of the brain, and then it comes over to the left. And so what happens is I may feel, let's use shame as an example. I may feel shame over here, which is the feeling that I'm not bringing you joy. Okay, so the right side of my brain will sense, it'll read your body language, and it will sense that I'm not bringing you joy right now, and I begin to feel shame. Now, shame is a demotivating, it's like, it makes me want to hang my head. It just makes me not have a lot of energy. And so now the shame goes over to the narrative engine. Now the narrative engine is going to explain why I feel shame. And this is where shame becomes toxic, is actually on the narrative side of the brain, because the narrative might be, well, they're not happy to see you because you're such a bad person, or you're such a loser, or you're so worthless, or whatever. But it's now giving a meaning to that feeling. And that meaning is often where our shame becomes toxic. So we see this with a lot of different things, that sometimes our emotions are generated on the right side of the brain, and then our left brain gives meaning to those emotions. Other emotions are actually generated in the left side of the brain by what we believe about things. And we'll see this in a moment, because when it gets down then to the subconscious part of that narrative engine, what happens is that beliefs actually begin driving my emotions at that point. So there's a difference between attachment-based emotions, and you can think of this, and belief-based emotions. Brain terms, okay, these are brain cortical line. This is one of the things I want to point out. Attachment-based emotion, or they are cortical, or they are subcortical. That in brain terms.
It's the feelings I have before I even think about things.
And to make this as
And they're
simple
usually
as we can,
related to
the
the fact
cortical
that
you can think of as the
I want to
conscious
be
part
with
of your
you,
brain,
but I can't.
Now on the right side of
Or,
your brain, when I'm conscious,
I want to be
I'm
with you,
simply
but I'm
aware.
afraid of you.
I'm not necessarily putting words
Or
to things.
I want to be
but
with you,
there's
but
an
you
awareness.
make me
There's
angry.
what you
You
might
know,
even
it's like
call
I've got all these
mindfulness.
mixed
I am
emotions
mindful
going
of
on
what's
here, and it's
going
not
on
that
in
I'm
my world around me.
analyzing
There's
it
a
and thinking
conscious
about it.
awareness of,
I'm just having these reactive
on the left
emotions
side of
to
my
what's
brain is
happening
where I begin
relationally
putting
in my
words
life. So
to
there
my
are
conscious
these attachment-based
so
emotions
you
that
can
I
think of the
have.
left side is where conscious
And that's
thought takes
those are
place.
the big six.
Whereas
We
this
talk
is
about the big
conscious
six
awareness.
negative
So,
emotions.
you
They
can
are the
kind of divide
right
them that
side
way.
emotions.
And then we have the subconscious.
And those are
and what that
shame,
means is subconscious
fear,
means these things are
disgust,
happening,
right? Shame, fear, and disgust
before
are the first
it
three
gets
big
to the
six.
point of being conscious.
And then
There's
there's
a whole lot
sadness,
of activity taking in our
anger,
brains before it gets there.
despair.
Also, what we're going to
So,
find is that there is a circuitry to the way the brain
in
works.
talking
and that
to,
it
to
starts
Dr.
on
Wild
the
about this
bottom right,
further
it
because
comes
he
up
was
to the
like,
top, jumps to the left,
anxiety
and goes
is
out.
a
So you can almost think
completely
about it
left
like
brain
electrical
emotion.
wiring.
Anxiety is
And
anchored in
it comes up
beliefs.
from your
So
nervous
technically,
system
anxiety is not a
up
right
through
brain
the
emotion. It is
spinal
fear.
cord
So it
into
is
the right side of
shame
your
is
brain
I don't bring you
first,
joy.
and then it goes
Anger
up to the
is I
top
want
of the
this
right
to
of your brain,
stop
jumps
because
across
I'm
to the
not
left,
liking
and
how
then it
this is
comes
making
down.
me feel.
And so part of what
Especially
that means is
relationally
that
and my attachments.
what happens on the left side of the brain is going to have a lot of
Fear
effect
is
on
I want
what's
to get
coming
out of here. I don't trust this. You're
and
scary.
that's why
Right?
our ABC
you just go down the
appreciation
list.
is really
All of
about
these
how do we
big
build
six
this joy
negative
center.
emotions
B is
have their
beliefs,
anchor and
and that has to do
attachment.
with how
Now, if
what
you go to
we
the
think
left side
about
of your
life,
brain,
because
I can
our
feel
beliefs
every
have an
one of
awful
those
lot to do with
emotions
what ends up coming out of
based
us.
on what I
And
believe
so, we want to
that have
address
nothing to
that
do
as
with
well.
attachment.
So,
So, for example, if I simply
we're
believe
gonna-
you're scary,
so you can
I
think
can
about
have an
appreciation
emotional
is going to joy
reaction, and
center.
the bottom
Beliefs
left
is what's
quadrant of my
happening at the
brain
top left side of the brain.
that
Connections
reacts as if you're
is
scary,
what's
even
happening
though
on the right side of the brain.
the right
In fact, the
side of my
entire
brain
right
never
side
really
of the brain
sent me
can be
that
thought of
signal.
just as a big connection.
And so
there
engine.
It's just an
it's
engine
helpful to
that's
understand that there are
driven to form
two
attachment.
completely
And what
different
it wants more
engines
than
in your
anything is
brain
joy.
driving
In fact, I
our
was
emotional
rereading something
state.
from Dr.
And
Wilder a
because
couple
of
weeks
that, they
ago.
take different solutions.
Where he said
that correcting your beliefs
nobody ever
will
goes to
resolve
therapy for
all of
too
the
much joy.
belief-based emotions.
Right? You don't sit around
But
going, man, I really
correcting your
need to go get some
beliefs
counseling. I've just been
doesn't
at way too much joy lately.
take
It's
care
like
of all the attachment-based emotions.
and joy is literally
So you
the
need
only
different
emotion that a
interventions
baby will
that are
pursue.
taking place there.
They will go
need
out of their way to
skill
pursue
sets
joy
for dealing with
and
these
so,
things.
So once
Joy
again, this is where we get our
emotion, if you will.
ABC. So before I dive into that, anything you want to add there before we go into pain processing pathway?
Nope, I thought that was good.
All right, good. All right, well, we'll this I feel like apologizing because this probably should be a whole session, but we this is just a part of one of the chapters. So we wanted to mention this. Dr. Carl Lehman, in his book Outsmarting Yourself, talked about the pain processing pathway. And honestly, it took me a while to realize that the pain processing pathway is essentially just the 4 levels on the right side of the brain and the left brain narrative, right? And that is the pain processing pathway basically says that, well, let me just walk you through all this because I think it'll be easier if you see it all. When pain completes this pathway, trauma resolves. Or if my pain completes this pathway in the first place, I don't get traumatized by my suffering. In other words, if I can stay attached, if my attachment center stays on, the assessment center stays on, my attunement center stays on, my action center where I can experience joy and act like myself stays on, and I come up with a satisfying narrative, I can suffer without being traumatized by the suffering. In the same way, if all of these things, if they have shut down at some point because of my suffering, getting them back on and functioning is the key to resolving that pain in my past, and completing this pathway is what resolves trauma. So, for example, a lot of us are familiar with inner healing, where Jesus shows up in memories and meets people. You think about what he does is that he connects with them so that he begins resolving all the attachment issues in their memory, and he gives them a new narrative about what happened in their past, so that they end in a state of appreciation for Jesus and what he's done. And so Jesus himself walks people kind of through connections, beliefs, appreciation, and boom, it's like all of a sudden there is healing now. This memory has been completed. My brain is freed up to complete the circuits, and it all continues on. In the same way, there are different ways that we can intervene that are directly related to each one of these levels. So we have suggest. I'll go back through this now that you've seen it. Let me walk this through. So suggest is related to narrative, and that is if my problem is that my beliefs are off, then as somebody trying to help the other person, making a suggestion of a different thing to believe can be helpful. Like, well, have you looked at it from this perspective? Have you thought about looking at it this way, right? Let's try this. The next one is show. And that is at the Action Center. I'm like, well, this is what it would look like to do this. Maybe they've never seen anybody handle anger before. It's like, what do you mean? You know, somebody can get mad at you and you can actually act like yourself. What does that even look like, right? You can show them what that looks like. That's a different intervention. Support is the idea of, let me do this with you, right? Let's go do this together. I've shown you how to do it. Now let's do this together. Let's practice. Let's be engaged and connected as we go through this. And then there's soothing, and that is my amygdala's firing. I'm angry. I'm frightened, whatever. It's like, okay, let's help you get your breathing under control, right? Let's help you, calm your body down. Let's help you soothe through this. And then finally is sharing. And sometimes you just sit with the person, you sit there and you share the experience with them because they just need somebody to be there. And so you can kind of see that all of these interventions are related to different parts of this pain processing pathway. And the pain processing pathway is essentially these 4 levels of the brain plus the narrative engine. And so when it comes to emotional healing, we understand this is why we're big proponents of inner healing and connecting to Jesus, because it's the most effective process we found for helping people do that. And if this is where you're stuck and what you're looking for, we encourage you to get the book Understanding the Wounded Heart, which walks all through various tools and strategies for doing that. What we're going to be focusing on here is not the emotional healing part of building bounce, but the skills part of building bounce. All right, and that is emotional healing is extremely helpful. It's a vital part, but we got a book about that. So what we're writing this book about is how do I build the skills and what are the skill sets I need and how do I build those so that I become a more resilient person. So there's our picture in a nutshell, and that brings us then to our, whoops, there it is, our ABC. So this is where we're heading today. We're going to, our next session is on appreciation and quieting. Then we'll be taking a look at beliefs. How do we win the battle for our mind? And we're talking about connections. You know, how do I build my relational skill set and also build greater relationship with God? So, all right, Nick, I think I'm ready to turn it back over here to wrap up our opening session. So that was a lot of material, but
yeah, that was a deep dive in right there in session 1. But we do have 4 more sessions, and we'll be going a little bit more slowly through some of the other content in the book. So very excited to do that. And this time I want to open it up for some Q&A. It's also a time to drop a few comments. You might have heard something that just kind of caused a light bulb to turn on and something that just popped for you. We would love to hear that. So if you'd like to take a moment to type that in the chat window of just a quote or a phrase or an idea that stood out to you as helpful, or maybe new information that kind of got you thinking, we'd love to see that. And if you have any questions, go ahead and ask those, and I'll try to get to as many of those as I can to hand to Dr. Warner and Stefanie at this time. Cindy asked, are we going to talk about specific ways to grow specific pathways back to joy from the big 6 emotions?
We are not necessarily going to break down shame. That would take a session for each topic, right? Shame and anger and whatever. So if you want that, that would be course 3 of the Deeper Walk Institute. So course 3 of the Deeper Walk Institute is on emotional healing. We actually have a session on each of those emotions and look at how do I go about creating pathways back to them. What we're going to be talking about here is a little bit more generic, and that is the idea that there are some generic things that you can do that apply to all of the emotions. And so if you, but you need to do them with each emotion, but they're the same things that you do no matter what emotion it is. And that's what we're going to focus on. That's
great. Somebody asked, is flipping the lid the same thing as having my relational circuits off?
Basically, yes. That's a, flipping the lid is a synonym for triggered. I got triggered. And when I get triggered, that's the on-off switch going off. My relational circuits go off. Same thing.
Okay. A couple people asked the question about, just wanted to have you restate what happens with Zoom and kind of the fatigue that we experience when we're in all these online meetings.
Sure. Well, again, this has largely to do with the speed at which the brain operates and the speed at which signals are sent via the internet. And so the internet is sending a really fast stream. It's just that compared to how fast your brain operates, it's slow. And so what happens is your brain gets tired of kind of slowing, of trying to make up for the lag. And so as I'm trying to read you constantly. So I was just talking to a psychologist on the Deeper Walk board the other day, and he's like, yeah, because he's got Zoom clients all day. He said he's just wiped out by the end of the day, trying to stay relationally focused and connected and in sync with somebody on the other end of the line in a way that he doesn't feel fatigued when he's doing it in person. And it's largely just an issue of how fast things are happening from the way I understand it.
Okay, and this one maybe for Stephanie. Did you say that the amygdala is what regulates the sympathetic, which is the gas pedal, and the parasympathetic brake nervous systems?
The amygdala is just an assessment. It's just assessing if this is safe or not safe, and it sends signals then to the autonomic nervous system, and then whichever system is deemed necessary clicks in.
So let's define automatic nervous system. Can you give us a brief explanation of what that is? Because I don't think that's a term I used in my explanation. So when you say automatic nervous system, what should come into somebody's mind when they hear that?
The autonomic nervous system is the engine that drives.
I said that wrong. I said automatic. It's autonomic. Sorry.
Autonomic. Yeah, that's fine. It is automatic. It's the driving system. It's like the engine that drives our bodies, and it operates on a subconscious. It operates in that fast track. So we're oftentimes not aware of what is happening there. That's one of the things we'll talk about next in the quieting, is becoming aware of what our body is doing and learning to feel that rev and know what it is, and then knowing how to apply some new skills. And then on the other hand, starting to feel that shutdown, because then that's the break when our body goes into shutdown. And we either want to go into hiding or being super quiet or unseen or unnoticed. Just becoming aware of what's happening in the body, and then how to talk to yourself through that, and how to ask Jesus to intervene.
Yeah, that's good. Person just asked a question about, is there a PDF of the notes somewhere? Yes, I sent that out last night to those who had registered by last night. I sent it out this morning to those who had registered within the last half hour today. And it will also be on our course page. So this course is being recorded, and by Friday night, it'll be on the course page. So you go to Deeper Walk International, go to the Building Balance Online Conference page where you bought this course, and log in. And at the top, you'll find the videos by Friday night. And at the bottom, you'll find a link to the PDF handouts. Kim says, I just want to say how thankful I am that they included left brain beliefs. Yeah, that's helpful. And it's very helpful for me, Dr. Warner, to hear you distinguish between the left brain beliefs that can drive some of those left brain emotions, and then the right brain attachment issues that can drive the right brain emotions, and just they need different responses because they're coming from a different part of our brain.
Yeah, they are. I had the honor of writing a book with Dr. Wilder on applying all of the brain science stuff that he's learned to the leadership task, and we're actually writing a new version of that right now for the corporate world. And so I've had a chance to talk to him a little bit about this lately, and one of the things that he let me know was, for example, validating a right brain emotion always works, because you're like, oh, you're feeling this is that's going on. But on the left side, you have to be careful with that, because sometimes somebody say, oh, I just hate this person, they drive me crazy. And you don't want to validate their belief, right? You go, well, you're right, you absolutely should feel this, this way about them, because you're absolutely right about them. And so understanding the difference between, there can be an emotion I'm feeling on this side of my brain that isn't being driven by this side, can help me know what to validate, what not to validate. And I will say that the narrative engine is an enormous source of an awful lot of our emotions, and is a major part of emotional regulation. It's just that it gets so much attention in the literature that we tend to emphasize this part a little bit more, because it is often missed.
I actually want to mention that, yes, on our Deeper Walk website, deeperwalkinternational.org, if you go to a little tab at the top that says Shop Now, that'll take you to our online bookstore. I just need to point out that our online bookstore is different than where you purchase this streaming resource. So sadly, these two computer programs don't talk to each other, so you have a different account with each one, which we apologize for. But if you go to our online bookstore, if you type in course 1 or just type in course, it'll actually pop up all courses, course 1, 2, 3, and 4. And course 3 is on emotional healing. And as Dr. Warner mentioned, he has an entire session on returning to joy from each of these big 6 negative emotions. These are actually on sale right now in our USB flash drives. They're normally $49 for this 8-hour course, of course 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. But you can buy all 4 for $119. So it's like 32 hours of teaching. So anyway, you might want to check that out if you want to learn more. Course 3, Emotional Healing. A couple comments of people saying, Wendell says, this content is awesome. Somebody said, this is great. You're confirming what I was taught in YWAM counseling schools regarding inner healing, and you're taking me further. Another person says, holy buckets, so much data. And I've been through all Deeper Walk courses, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So yes, Brad, yes, this is new content. Stephanie and Mark has been working on this for some time now. But it's new areas that are going beyond what is in some of course 1 through 4, and I'm glad you're finding it helpful.